Chapter 1. Preliminary Essay. On the correspondence between the Mosaic account of the creation and the geological structure of the earth, in a letter to the author. Dear Sir, sound philosophy and revealed religion are naturally connected with each other, however widely they may differ as to the manner in which they severally proceed. They are both professedly tending towards one common object, the establishment of truth. Philosophy sets out in its pursuit of this object from the lowest point, religion from the highest. The former begins with the last effect, the latter commences with the first cause. Hence, the mutual advantages to be derived from alliance are obvious. For where both parties are found to arrive from various directions at the same conclusions, each will acquire an increased degree of confidence as to their attainment of the grand object which both had in view. With these ideas respecting the general connection which ought to subsist between philosophy and religion, you will perhaps excuse my taking the liberty of sending you a few observations relative to their particular connection with respect to that department on which you have publicly announced your intention of entering. Geology and religion are inevitably brought into contact on the great point of the creation of the world, and it appears to me highly desirable to ascertain whether each, when rightly understood, does not declare the same thing on this interesting subject. Now I am aware that some of the commonly received opinions respecting the Mosaic account of the creation are entirely at variance with the inferences reasonably deduced from the researches of geology. But common opinions are often far removed from truth, and it might be particularly expected that they would be erroneous in such a case as the present. The ordinary Christian rarely looks to the Bible with a philosophic eye. Even where the opportunity and power of close examination exist, it is seldom that men inquire farther than into the authoritative evidence in favor of revelation, and finding that evidence sufficient to satisfy their minds, they at once receive the Bible as the Word of God. The same conviction which leads them to this implicit faith in the Bible as containing a revelation of divine truth, leads them also to look to it without the smallest reference to the deductions of science. It is viewed simply as the great repository of religious instruction, and even the historical parts are rarely considered in any other light than as the vehicles of improvement under the form of example. Hence it happens that we are particularly liable to error with respect to those parts which incidentally touch upon scientific points. Even the best informed and most serious Christian, never having been accustomed to consider them scientifically, is in great danger of giving way to vulgar prejudices, and thus of falling into the most palpable mistakes. Our consideration of the Mosaic account of the creation will present us with more than one instance of this description. It will probably occur to most readers that they can recollect the time when they presumed that every night and day mentioned in the first chapter of Genesis must be strictly confined to the term of 24 hours, though there can be no doubt but that Moses never intended any such thing. Critics, moreover, inform us that his words ought never to have been so translated as to lead us into the suspicion that he intended to make any declaration to this effect. We are told that the word which is translated day does in fact signify an indefinite period of time, but common sense ought to have led us to the same conclusion in regard to the first 3 days. In regard to the 3 first days, for how could Moses intend to limit the duration of the day to its present length before, according to his own showing, the sun had begun to divide the day from the night? But there are other prevailing errors with respect to the Mosaic account, of much greater consequence as touching the discoveries of geology. Moses is generally understood to give a particular description of the creation of the world out of nothing, and he is supposed to fix the date of this creation to a period either immediately previous to or actually contemporary with the 3 first days afterwards mentioned. But surely these suppositions are wholly gratuitous. All that Moses says of the creation of gross matter is, first, that it was created by God; secondly, that this creation took place in the beginning. Nothing can be more summary than the first of these declarations. Nothing can be more indefinite than the second. First, as to the manner in which the mass of the earth came into existence, we are left wholly in the dark. Moses simply declares it to be a creation, and he claims the glory of its creation for the one true God. Secondly, as to the period when this mass was made, he only says that it was in the beginning, a period this which might have been 1,000,000 of years before, just as well as on, or immediately previous to, the 3 first days. But that it could not have been on these days appears to me plain from Moses' own words in the 2nd verse. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Moses here describes an intermediate state of our planet, between the creation in the beginning and that of the 6 days, and it is especially remarkable that he speaks of the earth and water as being actually in existence during this intermediate state. The earth was, the deep of waters also was. The force of these remarks is much increased, first, by the negative circumstance that Moses afterwards passes on to the creation of light, atmosphere, etc., without the most distant allusion to any other creation of earth and water. Note: he describes God as saying, "Let the light be," etc., but he never represents him as saying, "Let the earth or the water be," which most undoubtedly he would have done, if he had intended to give us the same particular account of the creation of the gross matter of the planet, as he has done of what may be called the furniture with which it is at present provided. Secondly, by the positive circumstance that in verses 6, 7, and 9 he evidently speaks of land and water again, as already existing, and probably existing much in their present state, except only that the water covered the earth, and the continents of the earth which lay buried beneath the water had not their present superficial form. The earth was without form. On these grounds I may perhaps be allowed to infer that the common opinions above stated are erroneous. These opinions being removed, it appears to me that the Mosaic account of the creation tallies with the inferences deducible from the discoveries of geology, in the most remarkable and satisfactory manner. First, it carries back the original creation of the solid mass of the earth to an indefinitely distant period, beyond the first date given in verse 5. Geology infers the immense antiquity of the earth from the numerous strata of which it appears to be composed, lying one above the other, and many, if not all of them, bearing strong marks of their having been gradually formed. Secondly, the Mosaic account signifies that this planet was subject to great and violent revolutions, of which it gives one remarkable instance in the chaotic state, which immediately preceded the present creation. Footnote: we may consider Noah's deluge as the second instance of the same nature, though it was carried to a less extent. It is remarkable that St. Peter, speaking of this event, describes it as a perishing of the world. Of any other revolution it did not come within the design of Moses to speak, as the great purpose of his account was to furnish man with a history of his own race. The New Testament, however, supplies an instance of a third revolution. See the following note. Geology infers the same thing from the forced positions of the strata, and from the various materials of which they are composed. Thirdly, Moses, so far as he goes, countenances the opinion that the earth's crust was formed from water, since he represents the whole earth as covered with water, and the Spirit of God moving or brooding upon the waters. The geologist concludes that even the granite which forms the peaks of the highest mountains has been deposited from water, since it is full of regular crystallizations. Footnote. This remark is inferred from what Mr. Cuvier says in the 7th chapter of his essay on the theory of the earth, but I am aware that it is open to objection. The crystallizations alluded to might have taken place after a state of igneous fusion. I cannot help noticing here that while Moses leads us to infer that the great agent in the earth's last grand revolution was water, the New Testament tells us that the great agent in the earth's next revolution will be fire. Whether water or fire had been instrumental in operating any former revolutions, it was not the object of the writers of the Old or New Testament to inform us. The observations of the geologist would lead us to suppose that each might have been in action at different periods, and the Bible supports this supposition. But let it be especially observed that it is not committed in the support of it any farther than as regards the earth's last and its now approaching revolutions. The secondary strata are decidedly traced to a similar origin. Fourthly, while the Mosaic account leaves abundant room for the presumption that the earth may have been inhabited at one or more than one period, previously to the present order of things, it clearly shows that whatever beings may have existed, they were either wholly or partly different from those by which the earth is now tenanted. Moses declares that at the chaotic period the earth was void, that is, according to Patrick, having no beasts or trees or herbs or anything else wherewith we now behold it adorned. Geology appears to establish the fact that there must have been an order, or orders of created beings in existence, previously to the present, and it shows that this order, or these orders, must have been principally different from that now on the earth. Footnote. Those fossil animals which are satisfactorily identified with the present species, and which are found in situations where it is impossible to account for their appearance, from the action of any of those existing causes which are now operating in the production of strata, may generally be carried back to the time of the deluge. The solitary instance of man in a fossil state, which is preserved in the British Museum, was obtained from a very recent formation on the island of Antigua. See page 254 of Jameson's Cuvier, where it is questioned whether the man was not a Carib. Cuvier decidedly asserts that no fossil bones of man have been found, which can be attributed to a date prior to the revolution which preceded the deluge. The following observation of the same author is worthy our particular notice, with reference to what has been advanced in this note. The bones of species which are apparently the same with those which still exist alive are never found except in the very latest alluvial depositions, or those which are not either formed on the sides of rivers, or on the bottoms of ancient lakes and marshes now dried up, or in the substance of beds of peat, or in the fissures and caverns of certain rocks, or at small depths below the present surface, in places where they may have been overwhelmed by debris, or even buried by man. Fifthly, on the presumption that the earth was inhabited previously to the chaotic period, the Mosaic account leads us decidedly to conclude that the whole former order of creation had perished, through want of the due support from light and atmosphere. In declaring that the present light and atmosphere were not called into existence till the first and second days, Moses leads us necessarily to infer that during the period immediately previous to these days, there had been no light and atmosphere. Now it will be very difficult for the geologist to give any explanation of certain common phenomena in his province, without having recourse to some inference similar to that just derived from the account of Moses. Footnote. I find that Cuvier, chapter 5, endeavors to account for the extensive destruction alluded to under this head, by presuming that the animals perished in consequence of exposure to various and disagreeing fluids. Marine animals died on exposure to freshwater inundations, and freshwater animals vice versa. Surely this theory is liable to objection, particularly where it is found that several distinct marine formations, all equally filled with marine animal remains, succeed each other. The immense accumulations of fossil animals can hardly be attributed to anything else. The immense accumulations of fossil animals can hardly be attributed to anything less than the absolute destruction of whole orders of creation. The state also in which these animals are continually found seems to require that they should have perished in some such manner as that which I have just inferred from the Mosaic account. In numerous instances, the organs of life appear to have been in the most perfect condition to the last, and yet they seem to have died without violence, in the most quiet manner, as it were by suspension of animation. This observation is the more remarkable, as a great proportion of these animals are aquatic, and appear to have perished thus quietly in the midst of their own element. Footnote: any inundation like that of the deluge, which was not accompanied by a loss of atmosphere, would be utterly insufficient to account for so extensive a destruction among tribes of animals, to which such a catastrophe would be but partially and accidentally prejudicial. Of Noah's deluge we may observe that the water subsided gradually, allowing time for most of the water animals to escape, and leaving the orders of Testacea to be almost the only sufferers. Probably the aquatic remains of this event, which may be found in various parts of the world, will, on inspection, prove to be chiefly of this description. I cannot allow the present opportunity to pass without noticing that the deluge, however inconsiderable it may have been in its effects when compared with chaos or the end of the world, is a most important event with reference to our present subject, as it affords an instance of a revolution sui generis, a revolution in which a partial destruction of the organized creation must have taken place, and it is well worthy of remark that this partial destruction must have affected in a more especial degree that species of animals whose remains are found in such preponderating quantities in the bowels of the earth. Cuvier, at the conclusion of his essay, remarks that it has not yet been explained why shells should be found almost everywhere, while fish are confined to a few places. A circumstance which is easily explained on the supposition that they died in consequence of losing the support of the atmosphere in which they had lived. Sixthly, resuming our former presumption that the earth was inhabited previously to the chaotic period, and adding the further inference that the whole of that former order of creation had been destroyed at that period, we are plainly taught that all the remains of that order were, during the same period, subjected to the various operations of the immense body of water with which the earth was covered. This, again, is exactly what geology seems to require from the various states in which fossil remains are found. Though some, from having probably been protected by inequalities in the earth's surface, or from other unknown causes, are found in almost the exact state in which they were at the moment of death, others have evidently been subjected to the greatest violence. The hardest animal substances have been, as it were, ground to the smallest pieces by the action of the waters, and then by the subsequent stagnation of the waters they have been suffered to settle into a mass of compact rock. Perhaps also the confusion as to climate which is observable in the fossil creation may be attributable to the force of the chaotic waters. Footnote: see page 12 and note. Let us now turn our attention to a few points in the account which Moses gives of the present order of things. The works of the 2 first days do not come within the limits of geological inquiry, Yet I cannot help noticing that though Moses speaks of an original creation of light and atmosphere, he does not forbid the presumption that the earth had enjoyed light and atmosphere previously to the chaotic period. In the second day's work, moreover, an operation is described which is exactly such as geology seems to require for the original deposition of strata. It is to be presumed that the body of water with which the globe was covered held a quantity of earth in suspension and solution. Now, during the second day or period of time when a firmament was made, we are told that the waters were divided, and a great body of them was elevated in the form of vapor. The natural consequence of this operation would be the deposition of a vast body of earth. I say, such would have been the natural consequences of this operation, for no positive inference on this point can be drawn from the words of Moses, and much less can we infer anything from Moses as to the extent of the effects produced. We must presume, however, that its effects could only have been superficial, as the mass of the earth had been created before, and as geology gives us reason to conclude that no very great deposition of strata has taken place since the last order of creation perished. The only purpose, therefore, for which I would be understood to make the above remarks is to show the tendency of the Mosaic account to which I have already alluded. That is, its leading us to infer that the last crust of the earth was formed by deposition from water. The next work described is more decidedly to our purpose, and most remarkably illustrates the observations of the geologist. On the third day, Moses represents the Almighty as willing, first, that the waters should be gathered together into one place, secondly, that the dry land should appear. Here are two operations exactly corresponding with what the geologist declares to be necessary in order to account for the present appearance of the immediate surface of the earth. Cuvier observes that the present continents must have been formed by the recession of the water and the elevation of the earth. Footnote: it is unnecessary to refer to particular passages, as Mr. Cuvier repeatedly alludes to both these operations in his essay on the theory of the earth. With respect, however, to the second operation mentioned by Moses, it appears to me sufficient to account for many circumstances in the earth's form, which are most perplexing to the geologist. The elevation of our present continents above the level of the basins which contain the waters of the ocean, the irregularities which occur in the strata of which these continents are composed, their inclination, dislocation, etc., clearly show to the geologist that they must have been subjected to very great violence proceeding from some cause far more powerful than any at present known to be in ordinary operation on the earth. Footnote: the thread of operation is here broken, the march of nature is changed, and none of the agents which she now employs are sufficient for the production of her ancient works. Cuvier, chapter 8. Such a cause is undoubtedly to be found in the express will of the great Creator, and surely it cannot be thought fanciful to suppose that when God said, "Let the dry land appear," this cause actually produced the above extraordinary effects. Footnote: I would by no means be understood to signify that all the irregularities in the earth's strata are to be traced to this single epoch. Many may have occurred in the course of former revolutions of the earth. This remark seems to gather much force from the observations of Cuvier in the essay already so often referred to. He professedly devotes a great part of the 31st chapter to the proof of the proposition that the present surface of the earth is not of very ancient formation. In the beginning of his last chapter, he distinctly states that if there be any one circumstance thoroughly established in geology, it is that the crust of our globe has been subjected to a great and sudden revolution. And while as to the manner of this revolution he again speaks of the bed of the last ocean being laid dry, according to Moses the dry land appeared at the word of God. As to the date of this revolution, he makes this most important remark. The epoch of this revolution cannot be dated much farther back than 5,000 or 6,000 years. A period this strikingly corresponding with the date probably to be assigned to the third day of the Mosaic creation, which, on the presumption that the following days after the first appearance of the sun were actually days of the present length, will be about 5,820 years. This coincidence is the more valuable, as it is plain that it does not arise from any intention in Mr. Cuvier to accommodate himself to the account of Moses. Indeed, it is remarkable that the only revolution for which Cuvier has recourse to the authority of the Word of God is that of the deluge, and the date— sorry about that. Is that of the deluge, and the date of this event will bring him considerably short of the latest period, which he has himself fixed for the last great catastrophe. I cannot leave the present point without observing that Cuvier states it as his own opinion that even the primitive strata were more or less affected by the last revolution of which we have been speaking. In the 4th and 7th chapters he has these striking remarks. Having before spoken of the previous revolutions, by which those primitive masses which now form the peaks of the highest mountains were originally lifted up, at the end of the 7th chapter he observes that these primitive masses have also suffered other revolutions posterior to the formation of the secondary strata, and have perhaps given rise to, or at least have partaken of some portion of the revolutions and changes which these latter strata have experienced. There are actually considerable portions of the primitive strata uncovered, although placed in lower situations than many of the secondary strata, and we cannot conceive how it should have so happened, unless the primitive strata in these places had forced themselves into view after the formation of those which are secondary. Cuvier mentions other remarkable circumstances tending to establish the same point. I find from Dr. Kidd's excellent work on geology that he agrees with Saussure and Deluc in supposing that operations of a nature very similar to those above inferred from the Mosaic account must have taken place shortly previous to the appearance of the present order of creation on the earth's surface. Saussure was of opinion that there had been a great earthquake, or movement of the solid mass of the earth, beneath the chaotic ocean, and that this movement had been followed by a most violent eruption of the waters, after which eruption the waters gradually subsided, for which gradual subsidence the Mosaic account affords sufficient room in the indefinite duration of the third day. I cannot pass over in this place Saussure and Deluc's united opinions that the human race cannot be very old. They would seem indeed, according to Dr. Kidd's representation, to be decidedly of opinion that the origin of the human race must be dated subsequent to the above catastrophe. And though they do not, like Cuvier, go so far as to date that catastrophe, yet they would plainly lead us to conclude that that catastrophe was the last which had materially affected the crust of the earth, that since it had occurred, the earth's surface had continued much in its present state, as even the very boulders which it had produced had not been removed, nor yet, in all cases, covered. Before I leave the consideration of the Mosaic account, I cannot forbear offering a few observations on the passage from verse 14 to 19. Footnote. To guard against the imputation of rashness in consequence of the observations which I have presumed to offer on this passage, let me request the reader's very attentive perusal of the following most excellent note, extracted from the works of Bishop Beveridge, and cited by the learned editors of the Family Bible, lately published by the Society for Promoting Christian Knowledge. We must distinguish betwixt God's saying, let such a thing be, and let such a thing do, or so, or so. By the first he produced the thing out of nothing, by the other he gave laws to it, then in being. As when he said, let there be light, by that word the light which was not before began to be. But when he said, let there be light in the firmaments to divide the day from the night, etc., he thereby gave laws to the light he had before made, where he would have it be, and what he would have it do. This is what we call the law of nature, that law which God has put into the nature of everything, whereby it always keeps itself within such bounds and acts according to such rules as God has set it, and by that means shows forth the glory of his wisdom and power. Now in this passage Moses surely cannot be understood to speak of the first creation of the sun and planets, for he had told us before that God had made them in the beginning. Moses, therefore, must here be understood to signify merely that God now gave them a fresh regulation with respect to the earth and to each other. With respect to the earth, he tells us that they were now made to serve as lights, and being lights, they became further useful, by their own and the earth's mutual motion, to distinguish times and seasons. That Moses must be understood to speak, not of the planets themselves, but only of their becoming lights with respect to the earth, is evident, not only from the circumstance of his having previously mentioned their creation in the first verse, but also from his detaching the creation of light from what is afterwards said to be the making of the sun, moon, and stars. This latter circumstance plainly shows that Moses understood light to be quite independent of the heavenly bodies. Having therefore previously spoken of the separate and independent creation of the heavens and the light, we may conclude that in the passage under consideration he could only have intended some fresh regulation respecting them, and this regulation could only have been that which he very clearly describes. They became the great points from which light was to be communicated to the earth. Footnote. Herschel's conjecture that the sun's light is only communicated, and that it arises from luminous nebulae surrounding a solid and habitable orb, strikingly illustrates this part of the Mosaic account. And as by the communication of light, they now first, after the period of chaos in which darkness prevailed. Footnote. What may have been the state of other planets of our system during the period of darkness with respect to the earth, it were equally useless and unavailing to inquire. But I cannot forbear observing that the instances first of the earth itself on the original creation of light, secondly of Saturn with his ring, show that each planet may have had light independent of the sun. Became visible from the earth, they now first, after the same period, became useful for the purpose of marking the change of day and night, summer and winter. Whether they had ever served the same purpose before this period, under any former order of things, it did not come within the intention of the Mosaic account to declare, though nothing in that account forbids such a supposition, and it is open to the geologist to draw what inferences he can from the presumed nature of the fossils he meets with, and from the actual situations in which he finds them. Footnote. I am informed that all the fruits which have been found in a fossil state are tropical. This would seem to favor the presumption that the earth did not formerly receive light in the same way as at present. I must now conclude with a few general remarks on the account which Moses has left us of the creation. It is plain to common sense that he had not the most distant idea of entering into or accommodating himself to philosophical inquiries. His first object was to claim for the God of Israel the glory of having created the whole visible universe. His second object was to give an account of the origin of man and of that order of things which first began to exist at the same time with man. such being manifestly the sole objects of Moses, all we can reasonably expect from him touching scientific points is, first, that he should say nothing directly contrary to the certain conclusions of philosophy; secondly, that he should furnish some few hints in aid of such conclusions. It appears to me that he has answered both these expectations, and in answering them he has given a strong proof that he wrote under the direction of wisdom superior to his own. When alluding thus to the divine authority of Moses, it will be necessary that I should guard against a misapprehension of my meaning. I would by no means intimate that the writings of Moses need any support from reasonings, such as those into which we have been led. The authoritative and moral evidence to which I have referred in a former part of this letter as sufficient to satisfy the generality of inquirers is the great and only true ground on which the authority of Moses always has rested, and always must rest. But while on this ground I firmly believe that God spake by Moses, I am glad to find that evidence which brings me to the same point, and which comes even home to my senses, has been furnished by the researches of geology. I am, yours, etc.,